one day I will have to stop doing that poem because it stops being relevant.
Yeah, I
Wow.
do think people are more enlightened.
One of the things we spoke about earlier that I think is very important is the importance of running your race, or as I put it, we must cultivate our garden. And our garden looks different. Make sure you cultivate your garden. Make sure you, right now, whether we're talking about that, we were talking about Africa and its affairs. I was riding my bicycle and I got hit by a car, which is where all the scars here come from. And that moment, man, and just reflecting on that.
All right, viewers, welcome. Karibu sana. And to today's episode, today I am joined by an amazing friend of mine, Shingi, and we are excited to have a conversation today. Good stuff that we'll get to know who Shingi is. And yes, it's exciting because this is the first episode in 2025.
Oh, wow.
This is the very first episode. So people have been asking, what happened? But here we are, thanks to Shingi. So without further ado, I will have Shingi introduce himself. Please tell us about yourself a little bit.
Thank you so much, brother. Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. Let me just start off by saying that I've been watching, we were talking just before we started, how I've been watching this channel. And I thought this was a far older thing than it is. Just the quality of the interviews has been top notch. But yeah, the name is Shingi Mavima. Professionally, I'm a professor of history at a university in Ohio. But outside of that, I'm also a poet, author, make some music, as well as some philanthropic work, which I do in around the world, but mainly focusing on my hometown back in Zimbabwe, indeed.
Awesome. So from Zimbabwe.
I am from Zimbabwe, yes, born and raised.
Yes.
Came to the US when I was 18, just on the verge of college. And then I came here and I went to college. Shout out to Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids. Then I stuck around here. I eventually got my PhD from Michigan State University in African American and African Studies with an emphasis on African history.
Yes.
Which is what I now teach at the University of Toledo in Ohio.
Wow, that's really awesome. I do have some key figures in Zimbabwe that I often follow.
Okay.
I think they're really passionate about Africa.
Yeah.
Zimbabwe. In Kenya, we have 42 tribes. It could be more maybe by now.
Yeah.
Do you guys have, I'm assuming, in the same in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, maybe not as many as 42 groups,
Yes.
depending on how you define them.
Yes.
But I do know that Zimbabwe is one of the countries with it might be the most official languages listed, right, at 13, which most countries, a lot of countries, like I can imagine Kenya, definitely Nigeria has more languages that people speak.
Yes.
But a lot of those languages are not put down on as being official languages.
Yes.
So I would say that probably around those numbers where the Shona people, who the ethnic group to which I belong, are the majority, maybe like 80% or so of the country. But even then, that definition of Shona is a colonial grouping, if that makes sense, that there's at least 5 sub-ethnic groups within that. So they would not have called themselves Shona, like in 1800, for example. That became a colonial term to group this set of languages that there's mutual intelligibility, that we can understand each other. So actually, I'm a Karanga. That's my very specific group. Then there's the Zulus and Manikas, but collectively known as Shona. Then the Ndebele folks are the second biggest one, maybe around 15%, if my numbers serve me correct. Yeah. And those are folks who were part of the larger Zulu family. Yes. But when they left Zululand in the days of Chaka, under the leadership of Mzilikazi, eventually they settled in modern day Zimbabwe. So those are the two main groups, but there's a lot of others. There's the Kalanga. Yes. There's the Venda at the border with South Africa. There's the Changan, Tonga. Shout out to the Tonga people in that Victoria Falls area. Yes. So yeah, there's those groups. And then of course there's because Zimbabwe was a settler colony, there's still a sizable community of European descendant folks. So a good number of white people too that you might see. So yeah, a few different groups of people indeed. Yes, I haven't really got into read a lot of African history. I've read a little bit, but not as extensively to understand a lot. But I'm curious. I know this is outside the topic we were going to discuss, but I'm curious. We speak Swahili in Kenya, and that helps us all these different groups with different languages being able actually to communicate. Yeah. And Swahili is spoken in
in other countries. But I'm wondering in Zimbabwe, is there, which language brings you together?
The language that would bring us together is English as the colonial language. As in many of the colonies, like I said, about 80% of the country speaks Shona.
Yes.
But because of its more hegemonic position, just it's being like the more dominant group, at least in recent times.
Yeah.
A lot of other people from the other language groups also speak Shona just functionally. Not necessarily, I don't know if it's in the schools or not. When I was there, it wasn't.
Yes.
But it's just like the same way that like in the US, you got to speak English.
Yeah.
You know? So a lot of people speak Shona in that way. And it's unfortunate, the other side of it, that I don't speak Ndebele.
Yes.
Or any of the other languages, of course. The people who do, either they've just found themselves in circumstances where they've been in proximity.
Yes.
But that's one of the things that I wish we had done a better job of exposing us to these other languages, because I keep thinking about the fact that I write I write a lot about Zimbabwean music or just pop culture, like urban music. And anytime I'm doing, I might be like the 10 best songs for this thing. And they can only ever be Shona or English songs because that's what I understand what's going on. But I know there's not a proper representation of that. So for that reason, sometimes I wish I had gotten the opportunity to learn this language so that I could bring in to say 10 songs dealing with mental health and this, whatever. Right. But it can never be a Ndebele song for me. Or sometimes if I have a friend who speaks the language, I'm like, hey, do you have anything you would contribute to this list? But anyway, I'm only bringing that up to say in some spaces, for example, I know in Tanzania, I don't know if it's the same in Kenya, that in Tanzania, they were very intentional in making sure that everybody speaks Swahili under the Nyerere years. That's one thing that I wish we had done a better job of, but yeah, indeed.
It seems like also there's this hope or push that Swahili could potentially be the African language. It seems like the AU is trying to adopt it.
Absolutely.
Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's possible?
Possible. As far as it being a good idea, it will take a lot of willpower, right? Because unless you have a united, it will depend on imagining that the government of Zimbabwe, the government of South Africa, the government of, right now I'm just thinking about South and East Africa, maybe Central with the Congo and so forth. I think North and West Africa would be very difficult to break into with this. And a large part of that is not just because of maybe like different political cultures, but also because Swahili lends itself intuitively. It's a Bantu language.
Yes, it is.
So it lends itself somewhat intuitively to Shona. For example, a lot of the words are the same, right? If I say Mufundisi, you know that, what does that mean?
Mufundisi?
Yeah.
Is it like a teacher? Or
a teacher, exactly.
Yes.
A teacher or, we can say a teacher or a preacher.
Yeah.
So the fact that you knew that right away, we say Kuumba. When I look at the Kwanzaa words, for example, I'm like, oh yeah, Kuumba. Yeah, we say that too when you're creating something with your hands, right?
Yeah.
So I think for those, it's a little more intuitive. I remember listening to Swahili music and it would take me like 45 seconds or so of listening before I realized, like, oh, I actually don't understand what the song is about, because the sounds were so similar that I thought they were speaking in Shona. So I think with the Bantu languages, practically, it might be an easier transition, at least for people to be able to speak it at a basic level. Yeah. It will just take a lot of political will. And as far as it being a good idea, I don't hate it. I think it's fine. I think it's good to bring us up to some level of parity, man. I think it's not the grandest of moves towards the more Pan-African community, but it's one of them. You know what I mean? I think it's something that gets us closer to that ideal.
I agree.
I
agree. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. So I just want to pick your brain on that, because I know, you probably have something that you have looked into and
a little bit
come across.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, Shingi, I've known you through the Glimpse of Africa.
Yeah.
And you seem really involved in the community. Really, what inspired you to be really involved in the community to that level?
Oh, to that level, man. So I got to graduate. So I've always been, when I look back at my life, even when there would be awards, I look at the awards that I received, even when I was in high school and before that, it was always most committed community member, the Red Cross Award for this thing. Those are the kind of things that I was always into. I won't say I was ever the most talented I did okay. I don't want to, I'm very grateful for the blessings I've received, but I was never like the most talented or the most confident person. But one place I always found a home for myself was within the community and doing things. You can always do a little thing here and there, right? Like the smallest of things in a world where sometimes in either because of just outright selfishness on one hand,
Yes.
or over here, people just needing to survive and they're just doing their own thing. Sometimes we get so wrapped up and nobody is really looking out for each other. So I may not be on the front lines of this thing, but hey, if you guys need water, I'm over by the corner there. Come grab a bottle of water by me. So that was my thing. Then I came to Grand Rapids and we doing things as African community, maybe at college and maybe a little bit beyond. But there was also this dream. There was always this dream of, I wonder if maybe one day we will have the way that the Polish community is a Polish festival, the way that there's a huge Hispanic festival here. And I know there were some attempts here and there, but shout out to the Glimpse of Africa team, particularly, of course, we've got to say Frida on the forefront of that. And when she eventually came around and I started to hear about it, and there was no way I couldn't get involved, not only because I was just passionate about the cause itself, but I also kept thinking that for a long time we've waited for somebody or for some people to do this.
Yes.
It would be so hypocritical of us to not support it now that it's happening, because then it's a problem, because then that fails. Then in 5 years we are complaining again that there's nothing for us. But like, you gotta build it, right? Out of that, I've just kind of committed, and true to something we were talking about earlier in the week about combining passions. Just to say, for me, I also found my place. Like, not every bit of involvement or giving back or things has to be totally outside of things you do already. Like, I already love social media and strategizing on social media. So when the team needed somebody to run their social media campaigns, it comes intuitively for me. I do that stuff for fun. Same thing with when I MC or when I'm doing some poetry or things at those events. That's what I already live for. It just happens that it's now contributing to this effort. But that idea of just solidarity and being seen and standing tall, right? To say we are here as well. We count. We are not lesser community. We belong. You say Polish Grand Rapids, you say Greek Grand Rapids, you say Latino Grand, then you say African Grand Rapids, because we matter as well. And
definitely. Definitely.
Indeed.
I know I jumped ahead of myself, which is totally okay. I'm curious really who Shigi is, because I am amazed when I mostly follow you on TikTok.
Yeah.
And I like your poetry, even though I don't fully understand poetry. And I was not even good at it in school. There are some like poetry that will be read or poet, and it will just go over my head. But at the same time, I do the sound of it. So I have a lot of admiration and respect for people who actually can recite a poem or even write. So I have, if you ask me, it takes a whole different level of understanding and skill. And so I have a lot of respect for that. A lot of people could see you in social media or maybe in different events, and they have known the person you are.
Right.
But I am pretty sure there's a background story.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can share, what are the milestones in life or part of your life that have really inspired you and shaped you to be the person that you are today?
So that's a very good question. And let me just start by making this very quick point that I do appreciate the plaudits for the poetry and this other writing. But it goes back to what, again, we were just talking about this as I was looking at your setup here in the studio, and me hearing that you just telling me that you just started this last year, and I'm blown away, right? But again, when it's your thing, because I've known people who try to get this going. We might be 5 years deep, and their setup is not as good as this. And you are talking up from a place of somebody who's not even got all the resources in the world to be building. So the fact that you've been able to put this together at this stage, when other folks who might have even started at a higher point than you have over. So that's the thing. When it's your thing, it's your thing. But yeah, man, this is amazing. But yeah, I was born and raised in Zimbabwe, born in Harare, but really grew up with raised by my maternal grandparents in Mutare, Nagamvura Mutare. And that place is important to me because when I spoke about the philanthropy, a lot of it is sending the kids in those schools that I went to school now. So already that was a very formative experience, just growing up in this household. Now I live by myself and I absolutely love it. You know what I mean? But it's a very different experience. But when I was growing up in my grandma's house, at any point, there was maybe like 8 or 9 of us living in that house. My cousins, my aunts, my mom sometimes, when she wasn't in college, she'll be back, but sometimes she was gone. Then would have maybe a maid as well, which is just so many people in this household. So the sense of community and sharing, if you want to talk about formative moments, like you mentioned, that got in my way early on.
Yes.
And one thing that I also found early on, talk about, so that's the space in which I grew up in, but maybe even more formative before that, just the way in which your nature. And I think one of the best ways you can tell what you are naturally is when you compare yourself to, or when you put yourself side by side with the people that you grew up with, especially maybe like your siblings or like other people who were your peers when you were younger. Because right away you start to see, okay, I would say the reason I'm bringing this up is,
yes,
my grandfather was a prominent gardener. I can't even say small scale farmer for that thing. And he was always doing stuff around the house with his hands and so forth. And my cousins, some of whom were younger than me, maybe by a year or two, they were so into that. I could never get into it. So I'm just saying, even there's a way in which, whether you believe in God or just the way in which some form of intelligent design, we are set on our paths early on. So I was a kid who was always rather be sitting in the house reading something or writing some stuff. Or I would say, look, I came up with this thing. Then I would sing something or say, oh, that was always like my thing. People were like, this guy's lazy. Maybe they felt that way. But I'm saying I was able to meet people who empowered that side of me. Some other people could have killed that dream and said, like, hey,
definitely,
we need you to do this thing.
Yeah.
But I was surrounded two people that are very important to me. All these people are very important to me. But in this particular narrative, I had 2 uncles, my mom's brothers, Sekuru Jerry and Sekuru. One was an English teacher and one was a Shona teacher in high schools. So they always had like their books that they were teaching around the house and so forth. Yes. So when I tell you, when I was in 5th grade, I had read from a grain of wheat to things for just anything I could get my hands on. Nobody was making me do it. I would just find things, and if I could just pick up a little bit of a story, a lot of Shona book as well, Pafungi, whatever, then I would keep going, just keep going. And that just became, that's another formative thing. Then at some point I moved to high school. But when I moved to high school, another formative thing, I would say 2 more formative things here. I moved from that's a low income neighborhood, right? In Zimbabwe, we call the locations like a ghetto. But just my mom was back from college, so she was doing a little bit better. So I was able to go to a private school for high school. But if you go to a private school for high school after you've been to a ghetto school for primary, it can be jarring. It was very jarring. There was like 150 students in our class, and only 2 of us had come from a school like a ghetto school. Everybody else had gone to like maybe the junior school, private school, the top. So that, it messed with me a little bit for those years, really upped my insecurities, started to act up and started just like wilding out. Almost, I remember at this point I was threatened with suspension and I'd come bottom of my class because of the grades.
Yes.
And that was in 2002. I was in what we'd call Form 3, right? So maybe 14th. I don't know, what am I talking about? Yeah, 12th. No, like 10th grade. Yeah, what would be like, 10th grade here, yeah. And I was riding my bicycle and I got hit by a car, which is where all the stars here come from. And that moment, man, and just reflecting on that, I was like 15. I'm reflecting on life, on just as a young man. But that's a very formative moment because I got back to school. I was like, man.
Yes.
This is not good. So I started to focus a lot more on my studies. I started to focus more on being a better person, a better citizen. Still working on it. You know what I'm saying? I don't think I figured it out, but I can definitely say without that accident, I don't think I would have been here today. I think I was going down
So it was definitely a turning point.
Yeah, absolutely. To such a point that one of my favorite poems to perform is a poem about that moment. It's seismic, and every year when that date comes around, April 25, it's almost like a day of reflection for me. So that was a big turning point. Then eventually coming to the US, of course, and started to get into these spaces and adapting to this space, and just starting to see where my contributions to community are best appreciated. So that continues to affirm you, right?
Yes.
Like you do these interviews and people tell, oh, I learned this thing or this inspired me to do this thing. Then you know you're on the right path. So yeah, time and again with the different things that I do, I feel like I keep getting these signs that I should keep doing. So these are some of the more formative moments in my life for sure. Indeed.
Wow. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. That's definitely personal, and that sounds like it was a driving force and a life-changing moment, especially the accident.
Indeed.
Yeah, I'm curious. When you came to the United States, you said you came to school.
Yeah.
How was that process? Did you had people waiting for you here? Did you had a host family?
Yeah.
How was that experience for you like? And maybe, was it even hard to get
So this is the part where I have to be candid with some of when you are privileged in certain ways. Because the people who chartered like I said, I grew up with my mom and my maternal side of the family. Part of that is because my parents were not together, but my father had already had gotten maybe like a Fulbright, but a scholarship to study in the US back in the 90s. So him and my stepmom, who's my mom, my stepmom, and my siblings, they had actually moved to the US, but I kept staying, and it worked out great. I'm in love with my mother's side of the family. You know what I'm saying? I have no regrets about how that played out, and I'm so glad I grew up in Zimbabwe when I did. But I say that to say when the time came for me to go to college and I was shopping around, my dad was actually now, having graduated, was actually now teaching at GVSU.
Nice.
When I applied to college, I actually didn't apply to GVSU. I applied to other colleges in the US as well as ones in South Africa and things like that. Then I got into maybe more, but two that I was really considering in the US. And I came through and we traveled to one of them in Illinois.
Yes.
And it was fine. Before you've been to college, one, and two, a college in a different country, you don't even know what to expect. So for me, it just looked great.
Yeah.
In retrospect, I think, oh my God, it was like more like a smaller rural college. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I don't know how my life would have turned out if I had ended up in that space. But I was like, yeah, you want to take this up? GVSU. Part of it was, again, recognizing that maybe this might be better for me as a bit of a city.
Yes.
I'm not saying Grand Valley is the most cityest of places, but I'm saying like, at least it's not rural, Springfield. But also the other thing was just I had never really spent time with him and the siblings and folks. He also just wanted to have me around a little bit for that. But all that to say that, yeah, that really made the path a little bit easier. Any challenges I had would have been more cultural than bureaucratic or anything like that. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Definitely, I can see an opportunity to be closer to him.
Absolutely.
You ended up going to Grand Valley and he was teaching Grand Valley.
Yeah, he was there. Our paths never really crossed though, because he was in a totally different department, mainly teaching graduate students at the time. And also he was there for 2 or 3 more years before he decided to return to Zimbabwe but anyway, we did have that time together and we are great today as a result of it. Yeah. So like I said, the challenges I might have faced would have been more like on a personal tip and also just like getting culturally acclimated to the space.
I think for me, when I came here, I really struggled with the language for sure. My accent was very thick. I mean, it still is, but then it was. But also, I had not gotten used to listening to Americans teach. And so I had a hard time of trying to understand what they were saying. And also the same, they were having a hard time understanding what I'm saying. So I found it difficult to ask questions. It was like, and then I also struggled with the food. It took me a long time to get to use American food. And then I was in Hope College, Holland.
Yeah.
It was a little bit, it's kind of Grand Valley and also isolated, but I would say it was not that diverse. There was 2 Kenyans, they were seniors, I believe.
Okay.
So then it didn't last long, and then I was
Then you were by
there. Yes. But you mentioned Grand Valley. Grand Valley, as the person who actually helped me come to the United States used to be a professor in Grand Valley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
From Kenya? Or
Yes, actually American.
Oh,
It's
wow.
American, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a little connection in Grand
With
Valley.
GV as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we had at GVSU we had a good. When I got there, my first year there was definitely more than just 2 hours. But the guys who were there before me, they were starting that year, I got that they were starting an African students organization. It's the one that's still there today.
Yes.
But there were a couple of big brothers. One guy from Zambia, he still lives around here, Kondo. A guy from South Sudan, which at the time was just Sudan. This is before the split, but still he's South Sudanese as Jacob. Then a couple other people, but mainly those guys were on the forefront of founding that. So I just happened to be part of the founding group of the Africans. I always made that clear to say, I'm not trying to say I founded it or something,
Right.
but I was just part of the founding group. And I think I might have been the first events coordinator for that. And just to see that grow, eventually I was the president and so forth. And just to have been part of that cycle and this growth and to see it still existing today. Yeah, very important to find some form of community, especially across the board, really. But I think, yeah, especially as you head into adulthood, when you're like on the early on, when you're like in your 30s, I think community is still very important.
Yes.
But you may have found your ways where you can survive.
Yeah.
But when you're younger and possibly when you're also much older, I think those communities will become key. So yeah, if
Definitely.
you can, yeah, indeed, yeah.
It's always, yeah, definitely. I appreciate that organization has helped a lot of African students or students of color who have gone through Grand Valley, because that community is so important. I wish we had such a program. I hope. Hope doesn't do a good job recruiting African students. I'll say they try, but if you compare with a school like Calvin College, the college has a really good, but like a huge population of African students, which is important. So Shigi, in your education path, did you plan from way ahead that you will study all the way to get a PhD? How did that come up about?
Man. Possibly. Again, this is the other thing I've got to talk about, acknowledging your privileges, right?
Yes.
Part of it was because of my dad's path, which was already taken him that way. And at some point, actually, during my undergrad years, my mom, who had now left Zimbabwe and had gone to Australia, you know, she was also an academic, and eventually she got her doctorate as well. So that was the one that was already motivation.
Yes.
But the other thing is also, like, to be real with you, man, up to now, maybe I don't. I didn't think I was good at a lot of things in terms of things that I could career-wise, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I hear we were talking earlier about being a trucker at some point. I'm like, wow, man, that probably pays pretty well. And it's the open road and stuff. But I'm like, man, I would probably just be like in accidents back. That's where my head went. Like, or just other things like that I'm more thinking, like at some point I was thinking like, okay, maybe like a medical doctor or something like that. But I'm like, the way I freak out about things or just like telling people bad news, maybe I'm not the person for that. I was like, right. So yeah, there was that. On one hand, there was a path that was those who came before me. And in this case, my parents had traveled this path before. So it was a path that I was familiar with and interested in, just based on the skill set that I had. But then the other one was really just, this is my lot in life. I do other things, of course, as we spoke about, but I decided to make that my central thing.
Yes. I know we have deviated a little bit from actually what we were planning to talk about, but I think some of these questions I ask, sometimes they're just for me, but for the sake of my viewers.
Absolutely.
My apologies.
No. Because we spoke about a theme, but if you had given me a list of 10 questions that were different, then maybe it would be something else. But we just spoke broadly about a theme, and I don't think we've been way off theme.
I did mechanical engineering.
Okay.
For school and graduated, and I worked for different companies as a design engineer mostly. I've designed furniture, I've designed machines, and that kind of thing. And
that's the sort of thing. So hold on to this. That's a perfect example of the kind of thing that I couldn't imagine myself doing. Not because, I'm above it or something like that, but I could literally look at two things and you say, if you wanted to balance these things, which one would you put on top? And I would struggle with that. You know what I'm saying? And I would be like, it's not making sense to me. So that's what I'm saying. You get to know your skills. I'm not your guy for that thing, right? If you need a story told or if you need something like that, So that's what I was, sorry.
So I worked for different companies. And majority of the times, obviously we are in America. So everywhere we go, majority of the times our colleagues will be who are Americans, a lot of times Caucasians. But one of the experiences that I had was, and I struggled with, is constantly trying to prove myself that I'm capable. Constantly have to work, to put in extra work to prove that, hey, I'm able. And I have to admit, it was very tiring.
Yeah.
It gets to a point where it was like really tiring. What do I feel? And it's weird because nobody tells you have to work extra hard, but like the atmosphere, like there's that feeling like, it's like you're not 100% trusted. And so you have to prove. That was my experience. And I'm just wondering, like in academia, do you ever have to feel like you have to work extra hard? Have you ever had similar experiences?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, not really.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially when later on, like early on, yeah, a lot of other people in college are also like lazing around. Early on, I was saying I was working hard, but I wasn't saying like I necessarily thought I had to work twice as hard. Because if you're just working some kind of hard, a lot of people like early on, but later on when I got to graduate school and so forth,
yes.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, not just to prove yourself, but the other thing that I have to prove, because I do African-centered things, right? I do African history and everything. The struggle is also not just that I'm smart enough to be a peer, but also the work that I do is important enough to be considered alongside these other works.
Yes.
So that's when I'm like, oh, my work has to be perfect, because if I do this, if I put out this paper on the history of Zimbabwean music and it's so, right? Then it's not only am I proving myself to be an inferior scholar, I'm also making the topic itself, the things I'm talking about, to look like they are lesser things. So there's always that pressure where I'm like, all right, I'm going to write about this and I want to make sure that this is articulated even better than when people talk about whatever this thing, this American or this Western phenomenon. So yes, that pressure, again, like it's not something that you're always told.
Yeah.
But you pick up on it, you know.
Yes.
But I try not to, as I've gotten older, I try not to dwell on the proving myself thing. My philosophy around that is just the reward of a good job is having done it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So if I can walk away from this thing that I did, or if you can walk away from this podcast and it's the best version of what it could have been, then that's your win. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So so that's just where I'm at now. When I put out books, when I write things, when I'm teaching classes, I'm not necessarily thinking about, oh, am I working twice as hard as this person? I'm saying like, I'm doing the best I can, you know what I'm saying? Because this is what's good for me and what's good for the spaces I'm in. And yeah.
So what would be your advice for somebody who might be going through that at the moment? And interesting enough, it's only us Africans that go through that, even African Americans. Like you have to prove your intellectual capability. Yeah. If somebody is going through that at the moment, that kind of a struggle, what would your advice be?
So the first thing I would say is that first thing I just said, do the best job you can, right? Just do the best job you can. Sure, you can think outside, you can think about the cultural, the political socio-political implications of it, sure. But and I do this a lot, I've got a lot of little proverbs or little things that I live by. There's a quote from a French writer, Voltaire, in his book Candide, where he says, we must cultivate our garden. So the first thing I'll tell you is, let's cultivate your garden, right? Just do what you have to do. Yeah. Do this thing that you have to do and do it well, right? Your reward or your proof of your competence and so forth, it will come from your garden, right? This is not, hey, come look at my garden, whatever, just work on your garden. The other phrase that I wanted that, so that's the first thing, do the best job you can. The other thing though is we say in Shona, which means he who knows the way past the, let's say plateau, like a rock hill, you say call it copies in Zimbabwe, is the person who's traveled it, because it doesn't necessarily live like footprints, like the snow or the sand might. So the reason I bring that up is find somebody who's traveled that road before. If you can find yourself a mentor, doesn't necessarily have to be like somebody who's like necessarily intertwined in your life and all this thing, but somebody whose brain you can just pick on certain things. Yeah. Because when we talk about this, we're talking about these things, then we say like, oh yeah, this is very much reminiscent of my own experience. Yeah, but this was a little bit different here. So you're like, as a younger person, if you're coming in, or if it's just anybody who's coming into this space, yeah, there's nothing especially strange about this thing, or this is not an insurmountable task. Other people have done it before me. They may even know how to navigate this space. So if you can find yourself a mentor, or just, yeah, some figures like that who can help inspire you and help guide you through it, that's absolutely priceless. But yeah, the first thing, just do the best job you can and keep the main thing. That I say, keep the main thing. Then also find people within community that can also be a shoulder to lean on, and maybe like a brain to pick every now and then.
And
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, and maybe also, maybe to add on is, as you're saying, do the best. That's part of it, is really become an expert in what you do.
Absolutely.
Like if you're like at a level whereby you can become an expert, like you don't need any validation from anybody. Like you don't need to prove anybody. You just know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Indeed.
We were going to talk about balancing different passions.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned, let's talk about this, I was like, really, actually, then I struggle with this. Sometimes I feel like I have all these things in my basket and they are all important to me. And sometimes it's hard for me to know which one do I run with.
Yeah.
Should I just push all of them? Or should I just pick one thing and run with it? I do play guitar. So I like music. So I play guitar. Started playing while in high school.
Okay.
And now this is the podcast I'm doing here. I have a bunch of things that I'm trying to do at the same time. And I was like, am I just doing too much? And sometimes it's, how do you decide even which one to focus on?
Let me ask you this. When you think about which one to do, and or whether you're doing too much, what is the cost that you're evaluating that against? And my question is,
Yes.
when you say you're doing too much, because are you saying you don't have enough time? Are you saying
I think mostly it's like the time.
Okay.
Do I have enough time to give it to this one passion so that I can grow to the maximum? I can make sure like I can get the best out of it instead of just scratching the surface just to satisfy myself, but really not bringing the whole AB's talent out.
Absolutely, man. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that, because this is the very similar struggle that I have as well.
Yes.
In fact, I've boiled it down to this idea, and I might have actually spoken about this before. So if anybody who's read my stuff, who I've had private conversations is watching, this may sound familiar to you. One of the things that I've been running with is this idea of the question I keep asking. I've boiled it down to, where are they going to build your statue? By that, we usually build a statue in the place where you have the most influence, right?
Yes.
You might get Gerald R. Ford Museum and recognition in Grand Rapids because that's where he was from, right? The president. If you go to this place, that place, you might get different statues and things. The reason I use that as an example is to say, to your point, does my statue belong in the writing world because I did that all the way to the top? Or when I write and I rap and I teach and I do these things, does that mean that I'm a little less prolific as a teacher and as a writer, 50-50, when it might have needed an upwards of 90 in one of them to get a statue? They're like, where do you make your most impact, right?
Yes.
So that's something I'm struggling with to this day. And I'll share with you what I've found so far that has helped me is letting your calling, letting your purpose, letting your values determine how you use your passions and skills.
Yes.
Instead of, the idea might be like, oh, I love to play the guitar, I love to play soccer, I love to write, I love to do this thing, I'm going to do all those things. Cool. But then when you do it that way, sure, some people may do it better than others, but it might get too disjointed, or those things may actually conflict sometimes, right?
Yes.
But if all of it is within the same value system, okay. For example, for me, my values of community and of just the pursuit of excellence and these things, they are tied together. So my scholarship, for example, when I'm doing my research, and I'm doing my research on the history of Zimbabwean music, or when I'm doing my research on this particular cultural phenomenon, that's a way of giving back to that community.
Yes.
Then I write my creative writing, and I'm telling stories about like young Zimbabweans and or things like that, and the struggles they go through and so forth. That is not my academic work, but it's within that sort of general space.
Yes.
Then when I have a philanthropy that gives back to that place. So when I write music, I'm talking about, I got a song called Hometown Hero. It's my most viewed song right now on YouTube, around 7,000 views, nothing too crazy, but it's those stories as well in song form. So the reason I say that is to say, all this falls within the larger life mission I have. So it doesn't hurt me as much. Do I still think that some people don't take me seriously as, like lately I've been making more music and I just feel like some of it is pretty good. I still need to maybe spend a little more time to perfect my craft, but some of it is pretty good. And I wonder if I do think that there are certain people who look at it like, oh yeah, I know that guy. He's a professor. Want to listen to what a professor raps about? These are some of the challenges that you face. But I think as long as you're moving in purpose and you've centered things around that, your values, the worst thing that happens is it doesn't blow, you know what I'm saying? But it's not something that I necessarily regret doing. Part of myself is fulfilled by doing it. So for example, if you're doing this and you're playing your guitar, maybe you do it at church, maybe you create an intro for these interviews on your guitar, or something like that. Then it's like within the line, you get to do this thing you're passionate about, but it also didn't take away from this thing. So that's what I just like. Just find your values, your larger mission, and try to find where your different interests or skill sets and opportunities can fit into that larger image. Yes. Indeed. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I have to admit that part of me, especially with guitar, I learned guitar in church in high school. And so a lot of the times that I've played guitar has always been a child. And for some reason, every community that I go, there's always the need for somebody who can play guitar or participate in music. And even though I may not be the best in playing guitar, when I listen to some musicians, like come to Glimpse of Africa, you mean like people play guitar, like, dang, that's really good.
Yeah.
I'm not to that level. But at the same time, my contribution to my church with what I'm playing, appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Like they really appreciate it, you know? And so that was keeps me going. That part of my, my life.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. That's golden, right? Because think about it at the highest level of the game, to use a soccer metaphor, but you can replace it with anything. Like somebody like Wayne Rooney is not Lionel Messi. He's not playing at that level, but he's also very good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And someone else, maybe Michael Carrick, is not Wayne Rooney, but he's also very good. There may be somebody who plays in Division 1.
Yeah.
He's not like those guys. There may be somebody who plays in the Kenyan league. He's also not like as good as those, but he's also playing at the best level that he possibly can.
Yeah.
And that's what we can ask for, man. Like, so when I don't really be looking around at, the only time I look around at people who are doing better than me or who I think are better than me is to see what I can learn from them and just build from that. But I don't let that stop me from writing because I'm not Shakespeare or Chimamanda. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, that story exists, but there's also something for people who are writing on my level, and I'm never going to get better if I don't do this. Yeah, man, I think we are walking our unique paths. I think we were talking about that earlier.
Yes.
And sometimes the path takes me here, and maybe that will blow, but maybe it won't. But it will be stopped by some of these things that I've started that I realized weren't for me after a bit. But I walked away with maybe some lessons, maybe with some friends that came in handy a lot later. They'll be like, hey, remember when we tried out for this other thing together? Yeah, come on my podcast now. Oh, okay, cool. Now that's it. Yeah. Now you have this thing that I'm doing now. Yeah, just stay true to yourself and try to work everything within that larger spectrum of your purpose.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Also, what I'm learning is even having multiple gifts, though they may not be the finest, it's such a blessing. It does, like, if I were to go to a place whereby people are playing guitar, I can say I know a couple chords, so I'll not be completely lost, At the same time, you find people that are inspired even without knowing. Like, how is he able to play guitar, but he's also doing this community stuff? How is he even doing podcast stuff. And who knows, the kid will be somewhere else. What am I doing with my life? I have all these kids. Let me push myself instead of going to do something crazy. And so I think that even though it can be challenging sometimes to balance and also have a internal conflict, is am I doing the right thing by embracing all these things? Yet I think it's better to explore
Absolutely.
everything that is within us.
Absolutely. I love that point you're making too about the inspiration, because think about, to bring it back to the purpose of your channel here, right? There is this idea in many spaces that as an African immigrant in particular, in places like this, we come in and we go straight to work and we do that and we work the factories, or maybe we're in college and we just do that, just like a more serious, stay out of the limelight kind of thing, and walk the fine path.
Yeah.
How many people see you and you've got this podcast and this thing, you're like, wow, I can also do that thing. It's not just for the white kids or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But oh yeah, we can also do that.
Yeah.
Or when you're out, just like when I'm out rapping or doing these things, oh wow, we thought this was just a purely American art form. When we come here, you do the African stuff maybe, which is also very good, by the way. This is not, I don't want to make it seem like I'm taking away. I love that stuff. If I could, I would also be like playing the ngoma and stuff like that. But also, yeah, sure, do that. Absolutely, if you can. But also, this thing is not like off limits for you. If you find that, that's another thing, that there's other kids who look, especially if you're moving in positivity, right? Even just to say, that's another thing too, like with the rapping and things like that. Part of the reason I really do that, in addition to just like wanting to do it, but it's also recognizing how much stuff out there, as far as in that world, is toxic or is not necessarily beneficial to our communities or to the young people in our communities. I'll be like, if I'm not great at this, sure. But if somebody listens to me and gets to dance to me bragging about how many degrees I have, and maybe they just say, I might say that there's a rhyme I have where I say, before my grandma passed, she told me, Shingi, put us on the map. Show them that the hood and the books could always overlap. Knowledge is key. You can't place nothing over that. And I'm a smart dude. I got a bunch of degrees to roger that. So
wow, that was beautiful.
So I just say that to say, imagine, I could brag about the chains I have or how many girls I get, whatever, and all these things. But you know what? Providing a different narrative, right? Yeah, you can brag about how many degrees that you have and what that means for my family and so forth. So that's part of the thing. Like, this may not be the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever, but if it speaks to some other people here, then it served its purpose. You know what I mean?
Thanks for sharing that.
So.
Yeah. I've seen at least you have had a lot of poems. Is there one particular poem that speaks a lot to you and to your life? And if so, what is it?
Yeah. A lot of the poems tend to be a very personal thing. A lot of them, they mean a lot to me still, right? I would say upwards of 80% of them mean a lot to me. Every now and then I'll write a poem just to test if I still got it. Some poems, you might have written for like a love poem for somebody I don't even really remember now. So those poems, maybe they don't mean as much anymore, but the artistry of it still means a lot to me. But a lot of the ones, especially since as I got older, you know what I'm saying, a lot of the poems that I write, let's say in the past 10 years or so, a little bit longer, they've all been very personal issues or very, if I'm talking about society on a larger scale, it's because this thing means a lot to me. But one poem I have that is shorter. Can I do it?
Please.
Okay.
I was going to ask. That's all you had of the game.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the poem, but just because we spoke about that accident thing and how I was trying to fit in by acting up, so I'm going to share that poem. It's called Good Looking. Right?
Awesome.
Indeed. Let me see here. Okay. I've always wanted to be good looking. Dreams of being clean took me to abysmal extremes of deflated self-esteem, hidden behind fresh shape-ups and baggy jeans. And as bad as it seemed, I always knew that things could be worse. So cursed be the day that brought me ever so close to the hearse. A missed turn, frantic attempt to negotiate that dreaded curve, met head first with little boy on red bike just trying to make it to the curb. It shook Papa's nerves. It emptied Mama's purse. I've since let go of the hurt, but it lives immortal in the voice of the screaming nurse. The way you remember the feeling when you've forgotten the name. The way you still feel the heat when they extinguish the flame. Because now I was looking at that mirror with renewed disdain, because when all was done and said, the scars remained. It weighed on my mind. I prayed for a sign. I stayed on the line. The answer came in due time. He said, go back to that mirror, look again, and you'll find a masterpiece, divine. No need to change it. It's fine. Because the scars on your face and the stars out in space are just one and the same thing. Art in its place, godly, ordained, and over-garnished in grace. So I promise, Dad, this is not an emergency. No need to call the surgeon. See, the wounds are no longer unnerving me. Besides, I got tired of trying to be good looking. It kept getting in the way of my being beautiful. So yeah,
that's deep.
Yeah,
Wow,
I
that's
appreciate that.
deep.
Yeah, so it goes back to the story I was talking about the accident. That like the whole time I was
Yes.
trying to look good to these people,
Yeah.
but because I was doing that and I was concerning myself with that, I was actually stopping myself from being the full version of myself, the beautiful version of myself, my contributions to my community, and just me being at peace with my life was actually being compromised by doing these things, trying to fit in.
Yes.
And at that point, it was a moment in which I just let go and allowed myself to pursue my passions and to just be a better person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, something very interesting, because you had shared about the accident and how that transformed your life.
Mm-hmm.
When you recited that poem, I was like in it. Like I think if I didn't know the background story and like the accident story, I probably would not relate as much.
Wow.
But I was in your emotions. Man. That background story, man.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad. Yeah, that it came across that way.
Yeah. No, the thing is this, I think that it's an art to appreciate craft. And I think when you know the meaning of, if it's a paint, what's the story behind the paint? The image of that paint changes completely. And that's the same thing.
Exactly. So sometimes, it's very interesting that you say that, because sometimes I will tell the story beforehand for some poem, but sometimes because I also just want people to take whatever they take from it, maybe sometimes I don't. But this one, I usually like to preface it with a story, because I think there's a very specific thing I want people to get from it. You know what I mean? So,
Definitely.
yeah.
Wow.
So,
For sharing that one.
no,
If there's another one you're passionate about, I'll be more than happy.
yeah. Well,
can you give us one more?
Let me give you one more.
Please.
This one is a big picture one. Since we're talking about Africa and African immigrants and our community, how we connect with the community, right? Just a slightly longer, but just bear with me.
Let's do it.
And it's provocative on reason, but it's good. Well, I hope it's good. Listen, this one is called Last Night. So listen, last night I walked with the devil. He who since Genesis has been the nemesis of mankind and I walked hand in hand last night. And he said to me, Shingi, I know we don't always see eye to eye, and yes, it flows within my veins to kill, destroy, and lie. But tonight, I'm going to take a minute to boast. So we began our travels, coast to coast, over the land that I love the most. Started off at the southernmost tip, the continent's joy and pride, South Africa. For decades, this confronted us by apartheid, but now standing apart as the continent's melting pot. But hold the thought, for in a flash I heard a brother got shot. The same, for the same place I proclaim has earned undesired fame as the world's prime for violent crime. You can imagine my frustration as me and my fellow traveler went on to our next destination, crossing the border into the north, coming forth into Zimbabwe. Once Africa's breadbasket, now no longer the case, now merely just a basket case, and face the fact that we gaze upon a place where inflation has risen at a world record-setting pace. And the people do their best to get through their days and enjoy. But what can we possibly tell them when 85% of them are unemployed, when they see the courts where their tummies are too empty to fight? You get the drift, right? That's when the rest of the night, as we marched over to the beautiful land of the Congo, to the mystifying sound of the bongos, it is hard to digest that an Eden so fine, blessed with diamonds worthy only of King Solomon's mines, has played host to the world's deadliest conflict since the world wars. It's like evil struggling my continent on its back, and we're down to all fours, and we're crawling into Nigeria, where tensions boil. Brother against brother, sons of the soil, ready to kill and die over oil. Feet away from Cote d'Ivoire and Libya, where little is done and much is said, we watch as the blood shed, and it's hard to hold high your head when you're waist deep in rivers of blood red. And from where I stand, I hear the men tell me, yes, you can. Wish I could look at the man back home and tell him, you too, man. But the sound of my voice is drowned by the janjaweed running havoc over Sudan. And as another baby is ripped from a mother's womb over Darfur, I scream to the beast, enough, devil, show me no more. So we walk away from a paradise where in parts, a woman born is more likely to be raped than to learn how to read. In other parts still, child soldiers have killed dozens by the time they're in their teens. In other parts even, AIDS has reduced the average human life to less than 30 years. And I love to say I'm tough, but today I'm down on my knees. Even though I'm overseas pledging allegiance to another land, I've been crying and praying for my sisters and my brothers and family and friends still residing in the motherland. So that's when I get up and I face the beast, say, devil, why do we have it the worst? Why are we living in death and why is Africa the hearse? Why have you made this beautiful black skin synonymous with curse? And he said to me, Shingi, I told you I'd boast and I'd love to take the blame. All the same, let it be said that humans should be twice ashamed for the guns in children's hands, the raped women, the wars and conflict that cause your continent to bleed. I could never sustain that fire if it wasn't sparked by human greed. Gluttonous seeds planted by those who you watch as they feed. Corrupt politicians who equate money with the privilege to lead. And as another baby starved to death, I hope you can be proud of yourself. You've been the death of your fellow men, and the devil didn't even have to help. Thank you. Yeah, that's a piece I called Last Night. Yeah, that's been, yeah.
I do have a passion for Africa. And when I hear something in poem and touching from apartheid to what is happening in Nigeria, Libya, in Congo, and all these places, Sudan, there's no way, it doesn't have to be like this, but it is the reality of us, Africa.
Absolutely, man. And the worst part about it is this poem is one of my older poems. And which is why maybe I can now recite it in an almost second nature way. And my hope, which was maybe totally unrealistic, but the hope continues to this day.
Yes.
Is that one day I will have to stop doing that poem because it stops being relevant.
Yes. And amen to that.
But it hasn't happened yet, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I'll be like, oh, maybe I can drop this part about this place. Then, oh, it's back in the news. Oh, it's the Congo again. Sudan. Oh, after, for example, when South Sudan was created, I was like, okay, maybe that's the end of this part of things.
Yeah.
And next time I read this, or when I recite this, it'll just be like, remember that? But no, that hasn't happened yet. And that's very unfortunate. You know what I mean? Better must come. And we continue to pray for that and continue to work towards that. But that's what that's about. Yeah.
I have a lot of hope for Africa. There's sometimes some things take generations to change. Even maybe to the third generation, things to be able to change. But I do have like a lot of hope. There's one time I either didn't know how much my mind was colonized before coming to America. But I had one moment, I was in somewhere freshman. And I was in a calculus class and I was sitting there. And I looked around and I was the only black person in that class. And then I was like, assume I is in second. Ascend to be a president of Kenya. And one of these students ascend to be the president of some European country or America. And all of a sudden, they have the power to tell me what to do for my people. And I was like, will I accept that? How does that happen? How do we let that happen? These people are just like us.
Yeah.
But we had dealt with so much.
Man.
And then we let them just walk over us. And that was like a sensitive moment.
And think about that. Think about, we just saying like these people are just like us, right?
Yes.
And even that's when we're talking about just like being normal and being,
yes.
But lately it's being proven to be so true because like, when I look at this with all due respect, and I don't want to get too political, but I'm saying when you look at different spaces and you see the behaviors of the leaders of those nations,
yes,
you're like, yeah, I know this is not like some superior like they're doing a lot of the same nonsense.
Yep.
Okay, so where do we fall short? And that's where it is, right? You know what I'm saying? Like this, the integrity and then the intelligence of these folks is not something different. You know what I'm saying?
No, it's not different. Not any different. And that's why I'm saying, like, I think it can take a couple of generations to change. It becomes, we just came out of colonization. It's not many years, right? And you can imagine a lot of people who lived through that era, they are still alive, a majority of them. And so they still see themselves as inferior. But now we're having a generation whereby is flooded with, or he has access to technology, and they're able to see what is happening in America, what is happening in Europe, what is happening in China.
Yeah.
And they're realizing like they're not special than us. We want to live the same good life.
The danger with that, though, the danger with that, which I think I'm a little bit concerned about, is because that earlier generation, sure, they may have lived under colonization, right?
Yeah.
But they also remember a time when being Kenyan and being sovereign was so important, right? They might remember things like that, right?
Yes.
Or in Zimbabwe, they might remember the Chimurenga or so forth, right? In South Africa, they may remember Mandela and his peers being in prison and that being a whole thing. And I wonder, one of the things that I worry about is that with sure the newer generation, and I'm not one of those people who's caught up in this whatever. I don't like the generational wars at all. But if folks have not seen that struggle, right, centered around being Kenyan or being Zimbabwean or being Nigerian or whatever it is, but there's this access to technology that you're talking about. My worry about that is if that maybe builds a more individualistic, like I can do that too.
Yes.
If I can go to the US or maybe if I can move like they do. But if that's going to come at the expense of really us developing a national, a Pan-African identity, say, look, sure, we can do that too.
Yes.
But what I'm not trying to do, I'm not just trying to be part of the community of people who do those things. I want to make sure that my community here, it benefits off of it. So my worry a little bit is I get the sense, and I'm not blaming folks for this, but I just get the sense that maybe folks are exhausted trying to prove Africa's worth or Africa's place. That folks are just starting to do their own thing now. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense at all. That like, I think if a lot of people see those things and they think they can do those things, they're just going to do it for themselves.
Yes, I agree with you. The only thing that I'm saying there is I'm really awful because when it becomes even, and maybe this is off the topic, but when it becomes Africa and uniting Africa and even having one government, one army, a lot of times you find a lot of leaders, the current leaders in the past, they never came to an agreement. But at the same time, you can hear a cry of young people, why can't we unite? Why can't we unite? And then you find the younger generation, they don't have the power to do it because they are not in the leadership. Now they are ascending to the leadership and the probably things will happen. But it's taking longer than I would have wished things were.
Right.
Because I tend to believe that it's a complicated issue. Yet I'm so hopeful that things will change at some point. I'm really positive.
Yeah.
I'm really positive about it. And I think there's a sort of awakening that is happening.
Okay.
I really do sense that.
Yeah.
And even though that people are...
What are some of the evidence? What are some things that you can point to that you think are representative of this awakening?
I can speak about particularly in Kenya.
Okay.
What I've seen is people are more courageous to venture into areas that probably previous generation did not want to venture.
Okay.
They are willing to question why things are the way they are compared to the previous generation.
Okay.
Why do we have, for example, conservations in Kenya, where we have this area whereby we have animals, and people are questioning before colonization. How do people live with animals? They question, why do we have a lot of maybe animals that are not like there's extinction of animals that happened in Europe. Yet in Africa, we still maintain.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, now we have to have this.
Like this parts.
And they are saying that we want to preserve the animals from poachers. And a lot of times, if you look at who have been called poachers, they are Africans. So how can they be poachers? Yet the animals, they have preserved those animals all these thousands and hundreds of years. So people are starting to question that. And when you look, like you dig deeper, because at least in Kenya, people are really starting to do that. They realize that actually if we don't own these conservations, they are owned by some loyal families in Europe. but the people there, like KWS, which is Kenya Wildlife Service, they are just positioned there as a guard, but they really don't have a say. So the people, where I see is the generation that is courageous enough to start questioning this, and because they have the technology, they can dig deep, they can research, and actually find out. The influence that I've also seen is using social media is actually sometimes even overriding, sometimes the authority of the president. I've seen there was like a king, I think from Netherlands, was supposed to come to Kenya. People took into Twitter and expressed their concern. Even some wrote letters to the royal family, and they canceled the trip. So the generation and the technology is helping, and people are expressing themselves to a broader audience, and they actually is making a difference. So that's why I feel like very hopeful.
I'm hopeful as well. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like I'm an Afro pessimist. And it's sometimes we get tired, you know what I'm saying? But absolutely, I think there's a lot to be hopeful about. Like I'm talking about that election in Botswana that just happened. There was one in Senegal too recently, in which like leaders who, like in Botswana, for example, the party that was in had been ruling since 1966, since independence, since they and they had one last election, maybe 58% of the vote. They messed around in this term. They got less than 10% of the vote, which is such a swing for like for a thing that was in power for 6 decades. And even if they were to lose, you'd expect them to get 40% or something like that. But people were like, no, we don't want this anymore. And so that gave me a lot of hope, man, that, you know, and also to their credit, the guy, Masiri was his name. He was the outgoing president. Just how he conceded defeat very graciously. And I'm hoping we see more of that going forward.
That would be great.
Because that's the part right there when people want to hold on to power. Then people get scared. Creates toxic political culture. That's the thing that you have to worry about. Like you can see stuff that's happening on social media and conversations like this, right? But when a lot of bright minds or younger minds or people who might be thinking differently, when they, for example, earlier on, I was so convinced that at some point I would end up in some high-ranking somebody in the Zimbabwean government. I was so sure I was fated to that. You know what I mean? Then at some point I was just like, the toxic nature of politics. I don't want to do it. Not so much because I'm scared or anything like that, but I'm like, I've seen good people go into this. And within a few months, they're talking crazy. I'm when did you become like this? You know what I mean? I never want to, so that's the other thing too, that I'm hoping that with the changes that they also represent a fundamental shift in our political culture. If we can have a more empathetic, more Ubuntu. We talk about Ubuntu. I don't know. Ubuntu?
I know Ubuntu.
Okay. I know it's a Bantu concept, but I know it's very dominant in Southern Africa. I wasn't sure you.
No, it is. I am.
Because you are, exactly. Exactly. And I know that in other places as well. In West Africa, they speak of Sankofa, but it's similar. Those ideals start to become definitive of our societies again, and we have leaders who embrace them, and then I think we can get somewhere.
We can get some. And I'll give you one more example. Just the reason why and I guess this is related to Kenya. I guess I follow Kenyans. But we just had an election for the AU's chairmanship. Which is the Djibouti guy won. We had a candidate, Raila Odinga from Kenya. And we knew why. A lot of Kenyans knew why he actually was running. And why the president of Kenya endorsed him to run is because already the most unpopular president in Africa is the Kenyan president. And he knows it. Local politics and also is international. He has really messed up. And so part of the reason why this Raila was campaigning to get into that, he was endorsed by the president. The president was just avoiding a competitor. So once this guy is here in African Union as a chair, he doesn't have to worry about it. But guess what? Kenyans campaign for the Djibouti guy.
Wow.
Big time.
Wow.
Yes. They campaign for the Djibouti guy. And they said, this guy, Raila, who is in the politics of Kenya, Kenyans have been abducted. And it's not saying anything. The government is messing around.
Wow.
It's not saying anything. So why should we trust him at the African Union as the chair?
Wow.
They campaign. Go look.
That's amazing.
Yes. So that's why I'm saying I'm really awful. And like the effort of individuals, collective, it makes a huge difference.
Man.
Yes. So there was a lot of celebration for him losing in Kenya.
But people don't, wow.
Yes.
I thought it was interesting. Yesterday we were at an event together.
Yes.
There was a moment in which the MC was showing off flags and people I was surprised at how many Kenyan people knew the Djibouti flag right away. But I think this is probably a lot part of the reason that they...
why. Yes.
I was like, what? How did you guys know that flag that quickly? It's a tiny country.
Yeah.
But yeah, that might be a reason it's been on your radar lately. Huh?
So yeah,
Wow.
I do think people are more enlightened. And there is an awakening that is happening. And it makes me start thinking that African diaspora has been like the rejected stone. It'll become the cornerstone. It may not be tomorrow.
Yeah.
But in a few generations.
Indeed. And there's the move towards this what we're calling Afropolitan space, which is to say that we are also starting to, for a long time, if you were like African, but not in Africa, or not just like being an African nationalist per se, it was put into this exotic corner of things where it's like the music that came out of that was just called world music. And if you were like a comedian or a thing, like, oh, it's an African musician, then there's a certain thing that comes with that African comedian or whatever, things of Africa or African literature stuffed in this corner here. I think lately we've also been really asserting ourselves on the global stage, which is that in whether it's how popular Burna Boy has been, right? And I'm not saying there's been other, whether it's Oliver Mtukudzi or Wainaina or Fela Kuti, there's been other popular, but a lot of that was within the vein of, it does this other thing in this corner here, right? We'll wheel him out, but now to have it be the pop culture of the world, to be the mainstream, like Burna Boy or Rema, that's not some other thing, right? Or when you have Trevor Noah, right? When you have the likes of, we're talking about Black Panther, and not just the story, but even the actors therein. Or you have characters like Chimamanda Adichie out of Nigeria. And this is where we come in. You may not be on that level yet of prominence, but I'm saying this is the space in which you occupy, right? Ways in which you are very much African, but you are also cosmopolitan, because this goes out to the whole world. Right,
that's right.
And I think there's a lot to be said about the potential of that as we continue to tell these stories. Indeed,
that's definitely true.
Indeed.
Wow. So Shigi, tell us about the book, your book, and tell us about the book. I haven't get a chance to read it, but is it available on Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. Okay,
I'll look into getting it and reading it.
Indeed, yeah. So this is my book, The Leak. So I want to talk about two books that I've published. The first one, again, I've been in Grand Rapids all weekend. We were at an event together yesterday, at which I was also vending. So I sold out the other copy of the other book. So that's why I don't have a copy with me. But so let me talk about that one first, because it came first. The first one I have is called Pashena, Pashena. It means the dirt field in Shona. And it's somewhat autobiographical. It's the story of my childhood in Mutare, Zimbabwe, but not so much me just talking about my own experiences, but more talking about our community at the time in a moment that Zimbabwe begins to evolve. This is the late 90s. So the dirt field is a soccer field where we would play soccer. But in the late 90s, this is when the Zimbabwean economy, remember that poem when I was talking about the bread basket, right? This is when it starts to become a basket case for different reasons, right? Some political mismanagement, right? But also HIV/AIDS has run havoc in the country. So a lot of like young adults have died or are dying, but still there's a lot of beauty in our community so it's telling the story of us seeing the world around us change, but from the vantage point of our soccer field. That's Pashena. That's my magnum opus. What I still have here with me is The Leak. This came out last year, actually, just came out. I wrote the story of during lockdown. And it's a fictional story, but again, rooted in very real conversations and occupies that Afropolitan space well, because it's a story of a young man in his 20s living in Zimbabwe, but it's getting despondent. His life has not worked out as he would have wanted to. And a lot of people are starting to come at him about how his life has gone nowhere. Then a cousin of his, who's based in the US, visits Zimbabwe, as it were, and presents him with the opportunity to come to the US. And now this guy has to make this decision. what goes into it. One, his sense of agency. He just didn't appreciate being told that your life is not going anywhere, and the solution lies with you moving to the like that really like eats at him, especially because of the way it was told. That was told in a more condescending way. And it's so the story and the title of the book is The Leak. The reason I emphasize that is because there is a leak in the rundown apartment that he lives, right?
Yes.
So that's a very convenient thing, right? It is downright unlivable for most people. But for him, it's like he's almost fallen in love with the leak because it represents this thing is mine. You know what I'm saying? You can say like, I'm not making it, or I'm not doing well, or whatever, or my life is, I have this thing. I have my little apartment with albeit with a leaky roof, but it does an insight into how we process the things. It's a coming of age story. It occupies both worlds, again, the diaspora and back home. And just, again, the conversations around manhood and how we are making decisions, how we value ourselves and how we are valued by society. So it's a novella. It's just 100 pages or so long, but I stand by it.
I was going to ask, with the chase of the color, is there any story behind the chase of color, or that's golden is just your favorite color?
Oh, so
that's golden, or is it yellow?
I didn't make this part of the game was left to the publishers.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but see, shout out to my publisher, Samantha. She's a Zimbabwean immigrant as well, but she's based in the UK, and they've done an amazing job as Carnelian Heart Publishing. But she sent me like 5 or 6 options.
Yes.
Which had different colors. To me, I just thought it was nice. I thought it was nice. It was bright. Part of the thing that I liked about it when making the choice, because I didn't suggest anything, because I'm not a visual person. I don't think in visuals, I think in words. One of the things that went into with the other things that I rejected, I'll be like, so I can't tell you what I want per se.
Yeah.
But when I see something I don't want, I'll be like, it shouldn't look like that. There were other colors before, but some of them were a little bit bleaker. And I was like, no, that guy you have in that picture looks like, sure, he looks like he's struggling, but it looks like he's given up. I want somebody who looks a little more defiant.
Yes.
And I think gold does a good job of that, because it goes from dark to bright a little bit. There's something that is still holding on.
Yes.
It's the color of sunshine. It's the color of these things but he's still got his pride. He's still got his dreams that he's pushing towards. So that's why, that's what's going on with it. From the ones that I was presented, that's why I ended up choosing this one.
Because when I looked at it looks like it's a story of maybe a struggle, but it's like the gold brings a sense of loyalty, a hidden loyalty that is yet to be explored. So that's what came to.
So you got it. That's exactly what I was going for. Indeed.
Shingi, we are coming towards the end of this. We could continue on and on. We also have to finish up. What is a couple of things that we have talked about? A lot of things. But if somebody were to listen to this, what would you like them to pick up from today's conversation?
Man. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. What a fantastic opportunity. I think one of the things we spoke about earlier that I think is very important is the importance of running your race, or as I put it, we must cultivate our garden. And our garden looks different. Some people have like a garden that is like 10 hectares, right? Maybe like a whole farm.
Yes.
Some people have a tiny little sliver of land. But whatever it is, we must cultivate our garden. It might rain. It might not rain. Don't let the rain fall when you haven't cultivated your garden. Maybe somebody else will give you food. Maybe you'll be okay.
Yeah.
Or maybe you won't. But don't let that come without you having your garden. Because even if it ends up meaning that you end up giving them something a little bit like, hey, thank you for this here. You can have this thing. So make sure you cultivate your garden. Make sure you, right now, whether we were talking about Africa and its affairs, but there's a lot of uncertainty in the US as well, even right now, right? And in other parts of the world, wherever you may be. And when you look at it and you're like, oh man, this is such a big picture thing, right? What can I do if the government or if these people, if the society decides to do this, right? We'll cultivate our garden. Right? We will walk in love in this space, right?
Yeah.
We will walk in empathy in this space. We will work hard in this space. We'll walk in integrity within this space. We'll put out a good product with it. this is my garden. That's all I can control. I can't really control much else that's going out there.
Yeah.
But I know that if I cultivate my garden, and I hope you do too, because if you do and he does and she does, next thing you know, we have this community of cultivated gardens. We have this country of cultivated, you know what I'm saying? And that's it. So yeah, please make sure whatever your garden is, you're cultivating that. It could be in the media, it could be at work, it could be in raising your family, it could be in being a good friend, a good lover, whatever it is, whatever it could be in your artistry, right? That's your garden. Let's just be cultivating our garden.
Man, I like that analogy of a garden. I think about in a garden, let's say you're planting like fruit, maybe mangoes or oranges. Yours, you can sell them. Yeah. But guess what? It's you sell it to people. Or the other people could be passing by and say, hey, have some this. So it's these gardens, they are as personal, but also for the community.
Absolutely. And how do we start our garden? Maybe seeds, you know what I'm saying? Maybe somebody else with wisdom on that can tell you. So you don't just benefit the community that moment, but the seeds that came from your garden now become how somebody else starts their own. So this is why we must make sure that we cultivate our garden, because that could be somebody else's salvation as well going forward. You know, so indeed.
Wow. So I really enjoyed our conversation, Shigi. So glad you could come on the show.
Indeed.
And man, like this, I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.
And I really do know that this conversation, somebody will listen, will be encouraged, will be challenged, and they will try to become better. Where they feel discouraged, that they will feel motivated.
I hope so too.
So,
I must double down and thank you so much for having me. Not just for having me, because even if I had never been on here, I also just want to thank you for creating this space. You know what I'm saying? For there's certain people that I've known in our community for a long time that I was like, okay, I know her, or maybe this pretty girl who does this thing. Then I heard them on the podcast. I'm like, oh my God, all these layers and all this pain and all these victories that were just boiled down to a smiling face on, you know what I'm saying? From the distance. So I'm saying like this is, and that's me talking about positive things, right? You know what I'm saying? Like to say other people might have been seeing us as negative, you know what I mean? But this space allows us to share who we are in completion, you know what I mean? In a more wholesome way. So yeah, thank you so much for this space, indeed.
Yeah, thank you. And most welcome. I'm glad. I know there's a lot of people who want to start a podcast, and please, if you want to start it, please start it. We can never have enough podcasts. We can never have enough spaces. I have a lot of friends who want to start it. I want to encourage them to do it. And to our subscribers, thanks for being supportive, for watching and liking and sharing. And if you have not subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. It will help. The algorithm to push the information to more people. So subscribing, that will help the channel big time. And thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, I hope Shigi you come back in the future.
And, whenever you call me, man.
And continue this conversation.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. Indeed.